Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. This is Don and Carrie Massey, and we're excited to be joining you today. And we're going to be talking about marriage.
That's right. Our podcast is all about helping married couples thrive through faith, intentionality, and connection.
And today's episode is going to be all about, can you hear me now? Communication in marriage. You know, one of the things that I find very interesting is, when God made us, he made us very specific, and the way he did it was intentional, right? He gave us one mouth and 2 ears. You know, the old saying is he wants you to listen twice as much as you speak. And listening is one of the biggest parts of communication. And that's the area, I'll tell you, I think marriages fail the most when they fail to communicate and fail to listen to each other. And we'd like to give you some practical tips that's helped us. And we'd love for you to give us, your tips. What has worked for you in communication? In the comments below, go ahead and share with us. We'd love to partner with you and understand what's working for you and things that you've learned over your marriage, whether or not it's a short marriage or it's been a long marriage. Carrie and I will be celebrating 20 years this June. So we're hopeful that you're encouraged today and that you're able to really lean into some of the things we're going to share with you today. So listening, right? You're listening. One of the biggest things I really want you to get from today's discussion is listening to understand versus listening to respond. So many times we when we're having a conversation with people, we're listening so we can jump right at the answer, right at the response, whether or not it's a question or whether or not it's just a statement. We're just, want to, jump out of the gun, right? And speak versus listening to understand the totality of what's being shared with us. So then we can respond in a thoughtful manner versus off the cuff, right? So one of the things in scripture, and everything we want to try to back with scripture, because that's what we're all about here, is, in Proverbs 18 verses 13 through 15 in the NIV version, it says this: to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. The human spirit can endure in sickness, but a crushed spirit who can bear? The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out. So basically, we need to listen more, and that is a piece of wisdom and really will take you to the next level in your marriage. The other thing I think is really important is making sure you have great eye contact. Great eye contact is a key to great listening, whether or not it's in a marriage or in a business setting or in any type of setting you're dealing with your children. If you make great eye contact, that is going to change the level of connection you're having with the person you're speaking with. The thing we do a lot at our home is, social media and our phones or technology are always out, right? We're always got something going on. We're looking something up, or we're talking about something, or we're just scrolling. One of the things we've done intentionally is anytime one of our children comes into the room, we put down our devices. We put down whatever it is we're working on technology-wise. That way we can be present in the moment. That is so critical in the marriage and in the husband and wife scenario, but it's also just as critical when you're dealing with your children, and you want to make sure you're fully present. The other thing we like to do, especially with my kids, when I ask them to do something to make sure they're properly listening, Carrie and I, we do this all the time, is we want them to repeat back what we just asked of them. Because 100 times out of 100 times, they only got part of it, because they too haven't quite mastered the listening to comprehend versus listening to respond. That is so important. To repeat back is one of the biggest tools we use, especially with our children. And then another thing we do that I think is a practical tip when it comes to communicating within the family environment is making sure that we're all on the same page. We all have competing agendas. We all have calendars that are all over the place. I don't know about you, with 3 kids at home, plus our 4th that's already out of the house as a baby, right? We have all these calendars, all these things that are on our to-do list. So what we've done is we have a family shared calendar. We have an exceptional marriage calendar. And then we have our individual calendars that are shared with each other. That way, any moment, any one of us can know what's going on in the family, what's going on in each other's lives, both professionally and personally, what we have going on our agenda for the weekend. We find that has been a practical tip to take our communication from here to the next level. I'll tell you, that's really worked for us. What do you think, Carrie?
Yeah, it's been extremely helpful. I mean, we have a daughter in volleyball, we have kids in choir, all kinds of extracurricular activities. And then we have church and we have church functions and work functions and social lives and our dates and all of those things. And I know not everyone uses a digital calendar. A lot of people like old school, and that's fine too. I know people who have those calendars on their fridge and everything's mapped out, and that's great. But I think that is the key, is that we're constantly communicating what's going on in our daily lives, and that way too we make sure that we're not missing out on certain conversations, certain things, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But yes, the digital calendar, if you have an iPhone, it's so easy to create calendars, share them. We're training our kids to do this. They're at the age now where, oh, I need a ride for this and I need to be picked up here. And we just had a daughter who went to writing competition, and then one was in an art competition, and we tell them, we try to remember everything, but we can't. So it's not enough to say, hey, Mom, I have to be at school on Saturday at 6:30 a.m. We're teaching them, put it on the family calendar. And it's been really, really helpful as our kids are getting older and a lot more activities. We know who needs to be where, when, and we don't drop the ball as parents.
Absolutely. There's been many times when they're like, it's on the calendar, Dad. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I need to pull up the calendar to make sure I don't miss something. But it's been a life changer for us. I mean, the youngest is 12 at home. That 12-year-old is just as busy as the 17-year-old now. It's going to be all over the place, and these are going to really help us keep the communication clean with the kids and with each other, and where we need to be the next stop in the ever turning wheel of life.
Yes, it definitely helps us not drop things.
Absolutely.
Another area that we want to encourage you guys in today, when it comes to communication, of course, in marriage, in every relationship, there's going to be conflict. Whatever the reason for that conflict, a lot of times we get into these conversations and, there can be some feelings, there can be some anger, there can be some frustration. Conflict is not abnormal and it's not unexpected. You're going to have conflict in your marriage. Any relationship with any human being, there's going to be conflict. So it's not realistic to say, well, we don't fight. Of course, we disagree. Yes, we have conversations that, we are not on the same page with, and there's conflict. And that's just a normal part of life. But something that is important to have a healthy, thriving marriage is to really learn how to resolve those conflicts in a healthy way. Because just ending a conflict doesn't necessarily always mean that it's over. As we talked last week about forgiveness, learning how to, when you get into those situations, you get into those conversations, you get into those seasons in life where you're not on the same page, or, you're coming to a specific topic that you're not agreeing on, or, there's something's happened and now we've got to discuss it. So I want to, first of all, just encourage you, don't avoid conflict. I know this is a personality trait that some of us have, that we don't want to have that conversation. We don't want to tell our spouse how we're feeling because, we're afraid of getting into an argument, or we're afraid of, that conflict. And there's a healthy conflict and there's unhealthy conflict. But at the end of the day, anytime you get into a situation where you're struggling, I want to encourage you to work through it. Figure out how to communicate in healthy ways so that you can move through that conflict. I mean, one of the things that has helped me is really just thinking about, what's the desired outcome here? Is it just about being right? When you get in those situations and, he is saying this and I'm saying this, and, we're kind of going back and forth, and, sometimes we want to be right, and we have to be careful that we make sure that we're not wrong so that we can be right. And what I mean is, if you are sinning, if you are being angry at your spouse and you're saying things and you're doing things that are sinful, it doesn't matter how right you are, you're wrong. There's a right way and a wrong way to speak to your spouse. There's a right way and a wrong way.
That's good.
That you approach situations, regardless of who is technically right and who is technically wrong. And most of the time, it's somewhere in the middle. We all know that.
He's always right. That's another message for another time, but he's always right.
But you can be right, but still be wrong because of how you handle the situation, how you speak to your spouse, how you handle their heart, how you handle their emotions. They're a person, and we can lose that in the heat of the moment because we just want to be right and we just want to get our point across. Don't avoid conflict, but also learn how to, resolve it in a healthy way. Don't avoid it. What's the desired outcome? It's not about being right. It's not about proving to your spouse that you're smarter than them or you're better than them or your way is better or you know what's, better than they do. But the outcome is that the desired outcome is that we come to usually a compromise, or one of us has to say, okay, you know what? We'll do it your way. Or you know what? That's fine. Let's, somebody has to be the one to say, okay, kind of step back and relinquish or say, okay, you know what? Like Dawn has done this many times. We're on the same team. And that kind of just brings us back into that place. Okay, let's have a conversation. Another thing about conflict resolution is understanding that if you are angry and you're in an argument, you're probably not going to resolve whatever the actual issue is in that moment because you're just too fired up. And something that we encourage you to do is sometimes you just have to step back. And it's not about avoiding the conflict and not revisiting, but it's about taking a break, right? Like, when your kids are little and you give them a timeout, what's the purpose of that timeout? Or some people do time in, right? The purpose is to sort of remove yourself from that situation so you have time to calm down. So you have time to sort of regroup. And sometimes you have to do that when you're in the heat of the moment with your spouse and you're not getting anywhere and it's escalating. You have to de-escalate. And sometimes that's like, you know what? I don't think we're going to solve anything right now. Or, you know what? I'm feeling really upset. I'm really frustrated. I don't want to say something that I'm going to regret. I don't want to say things I shouldn't. So let's revisit this when we've had a chance to think about it some more. That's okay. You don't have to come up with an answer always right away. You don't always have to agree right away. Sometimes you can say, okay, you've said your piece. I've said my piece. I've tried to understand where you're coming from. You tried to understand where I'm coming from. Let's revisit this. But then it's extremely important that you then revisit it, because I think a lot of times we think that just ending the argument and moving on with life is, okay, well, that's over. But that's kind of where that resentment and unforgiveness can come in if you don't resolve the issue. If you don't come back and say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Or look, I don't think you were really understanding where I'm coming from. Can we try this again? And revisit it in a time when you're not angry, you're not fired up, you're not tired from a full day of work, whatever it may be. Revisit that conversation and just learn how to work through those conflicts in healthy ways, because ultimately it will bring you closer together. When you have conflict and you don't really resolve it in a healthy way, it builds barriers between you and your spouse. They're invisible and you don't see them, but they're there and they begin to build. And so I think it's extremely important that you resolve those conflicts. And when you do, and you do it in a healthy way, it actually brings closeness. It actually brings you closer. Conflict can bring you closer together if you resolve it in a healthy way.
Like, and when you're having a challenging discussion, I want to make sure I just make a note of this, that you want to plan those out. If you know your financial discussion will be a little bit challenging, could cause some emotions to raise up, you might want to schedule those. That way they're not, the other person can prepare their mind for it. They're not late at night. They're when that's most appropriate. Maybe that's Saturday morning, or maybe that's Sunday after church where everybody's in a good mood, right? They just got filled again with a great word, and that might make a lot of sense for your family.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think anytime there's conversations that are important and they need to be had, even if they're not going to be necessarily conflict, but sometimes it's just good to say, hey, we need to have a conversation about XYZ and put it on the calendar, just like everything else. We'll say, hey, you know what, this weekend we need to have a sit down. Sometimes it's, you've got something going on with your kid and life's so busy. We're running from here to there. We say, hey, let's sit down and have a conversation about XYZ and how we're going to handle this. Or it's your goals, right, in life, where you're running at in your marriage, your careers, your raising of your children, but set aside time to have those conversations, whether they're going to be more difficult or not. Tell your spouse, hey, I really need to talk to you about something this weekend, and you can tell them what it is, but plan those conversations out. I think that's good.
Yeah, I think for us, our word of the year is thrive. And in order to thrive, you need to be intentional with your words, intentional on how you communicate. And every once in a while, you're going to mess up. I don't know about you, but I'm in the camp where I'm not perfect and I'm going to mess up. And, if you're a golfer out there, you know what a mulligan is. And the ones that don't know what a mulligan is, it's when you make a mistake and you get to do it over. and you say mulligan, and sometimes you can, in a tournament that is like a charity tournament, you can pay for mulligans and you get, 5, 10, or 15 mulligans and you get to try again. Well, here's the deal. A lot of times, if we're really paying attention, we're like realize almost immediately after we said, well, I'm so sorry. I really need a mulligan. I am so sorry, honey. I didn't mean it that way. My heart didn't mean it that way. It came out wrong. Will you please forgive me? Ask for forgiveness. That's important for you and for them. But that mulligan is so important because I'll promise you, you're going to mess up. And if you think you're not, then you're just not paying attention, right? Us men especially, sometimes we get excited. There's some guys that battle anger. There's some guys that battle other things that just don't know how to control the mouth. And that's not just guys, that's ladies too, but I'll talk to the men, right? Own up to it. Man, I messed up. Ask for forgiveness. Try again and communicate your point from a position of peace and calmness versus being excited. That is never going to end well for you. Being angry, trying to communicate a point when you're trying to do a do-over, you're mulligan. Do it and do it with the right heart. And I think that's so important. So many times we get lost in trying to be right. Like you said, no, I don't need to be right. I'm sorry. I messed up. This is how you move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So in communicating effectively and resolving conflicts, learning how to listen to your spouse, owning up when you mess up, these are all extremely important. And I think the biggest thing in communication as we wrap up, especially in marriage, is it's just going to require so much humility, because at the end of the day, we all want to get our point across and we all want to be right. But we have to ask the Lord to help us and be humble, be willing to recognize when we don't handle things correctly, recognize when our attitude is just not there, and listen to our spouse. I think that is it's so important to really try to understand where they're coming from. Don't assume. Something I think that I learned after many fights early on was, don't assume you think you know what they mean. Don't assume. We can get these presumptions. We can start to presume because of past experiences, either with our spouse or with someone else, that we automatically start to hear things. They're not even saying what you think they're saying. You're hearing what your brain and your conditioning and your past experiences and how you were raised, you're hearing one thing and that's not even really what they're saying. So be humble, ask the Lord to help you and communicate better with your spouse. Listen to understand, and always be transparent and honest, because I think that with communication, that's the biggest thing in our marriage is we don't have secrets. We don't keep things from each other, and we do our best to be honest. And if I need to communicate something, I need to know that he's going to receive it in a loving way, and he's going to be humble, and he's going to listen and care about what it is that I'm trying to communicate to him, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we end, remember, husband and wife, you are on the same team. You should have the same goals. You should be working together to achieve those in communicating. If you communicate clearly in your marriage, you're on the same team. That marriage is got a great runway ahead. And that's our challenge to you today. If you feel that this message has spoke to you, we'd like you to like a comment, please, and go ahead and subscribe. We would love it. Would honor us if you do that, and we look forward to speak with you next week.
Thanks, everyone.